All right. So I mean, obviously, collaboration is an integral part of government, but not just between the public sector and the private sector, but also interagency collaboration, which is essential. So these presentations are very keen and insightful on, I imagine, ways to enhance and improve that level of collaboration in these different entities, and really interested and curious to hear what you all have to say. As I mentioned, Dr. Thomas Breyer will be the discussant. You'll have 18 minutes per presentation, which will lead to a robust conversation at the end. So if I may just introduce the presentations quickly. The first, as I mentioned, by Johnson and Mcmahon Fulford, focusing on the individual in cross-sectoral collaboration, leaders' characteristics and skills. Their research seeks to understand what individual characteristics may influence them to behave in a way that results in collaboration. The second presentation by Jennifer Hamburger, the collaborative process between communities and local government, the public administrator's responsibility, and her presentation, at least in part, will focus on the goal of collaborations to solve problems or identify problems and provide solutions. Third presentation by Kenneth Powers, advancement in administrative tethering, strategic corporal, three-block war and administrative tethering exemplar. And how can administrative tethering inform sustaining or sustain collaboration as part of their focus. And the final presentation by Ansuman Raboni, an appraisement of the imperatives of National Institute Ranking Framework and National Assessment and Accreditation Council in improving performance and quality of higher education in India. So I'll turn over to you, Tom, and then the presenters.
I have no comments at this point in time. Let's move forward with the presentations.
Okay, I'm going to share our screen. Give me 1 second here. Okay, hopefully you can see the title of our paper. And I'm going to have my co-author, my co-presenter introduce herself momentarily, but you can see that we are presenting on behalf of ourselves and my colleague at AU, Haldouna Bouassi, and Sarah Nielsen, another PhD student, and then our colleague Ann Bowman, who's at the Bush School at Texas A&M. And the contribution of this paper, we think, is that it focuses on collaboration between non-governmental organizations and local governments in developing countries where local governments are still relatively fragile and governments are often very highly centralized as compared to here in the US. This is part of a larger project on NGO local government cooperation in Lebanon, which is a developing country with a unique set of circumstances. And we always have that caveat in this research. And we think that the lessons from situations like that in Lebanon are helpful not only to the US, but also to other countries with similar situations, that is a developing institutional structure and so on. So with that, I'm going to ask my colleague Laura to introduce herself and begin the presentation.
Could you go to the next slide, Jocelyn? Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Mcmahon Fulford. I am a first-year student, a PhD student at American University, and I'm working with Jocelyn on this project and some others. So as she mentioned, what we're really looking at here is the concept of individuals as drivers of organizational collaboration. So while organizations are collaborating, that collaboration is motivated by the individuals making decisions. They are the ones that ultimately are collaborating with one another as representatives of those organizations. So we are seeking to understand how characteristics of those individuals may affect the propensity for collaborations to happen, and also how effectiveness is perceived when those collaborations are happening between government and nonprofit organizations. Interpersonal skills and characteristics such as trustworthiness, ability to work with other people are things that can be developed through experience, education, and training. So 3 of our independent variables are related to that: tenure, the amount of time somebody is within their job, their level of education, and their professional experience. Next slide, please. As she mentioned, we do need to contextualize this within where we gather this data from. It is coming from Lebanon, which has an impact on how individuals interact in these different organizations. Because of the Lebanese civil war and an economy that has experienced multiple struggles, there has been a proliferation of a strong nonprofit sector that has previously been, well, continues still, but was based off of international relief associated with those issues. They have a very strong history now. They tend to work with central government, as the government system within Lebanon is very centralized, but they will seek out support from local government to boost legitimacy. But they do, again, have to go and rely on central government in order to facilitate those relationships. So in Lebanon, there's also this culture that really values interpersonal relationships and affiliations. So membership within different organizations, family structures, etc. So to address that, we have this independent variable of sector affiliation. For clarification, what that means, it's if you were a member of an organization or if you served on a board for another sector's organization. So if you were on the board for a local government when you are a nonprofit employee, or vice versa. There are also patriarchal norms that impact gender parity within the country. In previous research that utilized this data, it was found that government organizations led by women were less likely to collaborate than those by men, except in certain scenarios. So for that reason, we also have the independent variable for gender that we measure. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a frog in my throat. You could probably hear that. I think it's the pollen that we're all experiencing right now. So next slide, and I think Jocelyn will talk about the data analysis now.
Yes, thank you. By the way, I should have mentioned earlier, why are we presenting this in a performance conference? And the reason is that the perceived effectiveness of the collaboration is an element of performance. So those of you who are old implementation scholars like me, you can look at the success of the implementation itself, and you can look at the success of the policy that you're implementing. So the outcome, if you will. We're looking here at perceived effectiveness of the collaborative structures themselves. So I just wanted to emphasize that. So how does the collaboration itself perform is one of our dependent variables. The data is based on 2 basically identical surveys of local government and nonprofit officials in Lebanon conducted in early 2017. These surveys were pre-tested with individuals from each group. And we ended up with a total of roughly 240, 220 completed surveys for each sector. So the nonprofit sector, we had a slightly higher response rate, which is interesting, 34% response rate for 221 total surveys, and local government, a lower response rate, but a similar number of completed surveys. Because of the kinds of variables we're using, we used models built around binary and ordered logit protocols. So quick review of our variables. Again, the self-reported or perceived effectiveness of the collaboration itself, which is an ordinal variable, and whether or not the respondent is currently collaborating. And the reason for that is that we ask the respondents, are you collaborating? And if you are, answer these questions. So are they collaborating is an important element of this. And then we have the independent variables, some of which Laura had mentioned: gender, education, tenure, experience, and affiliation with the other sector, as well as some organizational control variables, the budget size, which is reported ordinally, the staff size similar, and whether or not the organization is located in an urbanized area or not. So the results of our analysis are presented in the following 2 tables. And what you can see is that Statistically significant estimates are provided with the blue shading, and gender does suppress the propensity to collaborate among local government officials. And this is in many ways not surprising. Local governments in Lebanon have very limited authority. Women leaders in local governments are few and far between. And of course, in a patriarchal society, there are lots of pressures on them that might operate very differently than in other countries. Interestingly, we have some individual characteristics, results, tenure, experience, affiliation, and affiliation with other sector. These have some impact on the propensity to collaborate. I'm not going to talk so much about the actual estimates as I am about the fact that they don't exist in the nonprofit sector. So this first column on the left is the local government sample, and we have results that are completely different than what we see in the nonprofit sample. So the estimates in the nonprofit sample are often in different directions, and they don't match in terms of statistical significance. And this implies that something is going on in terms of differences across the sectors with regard to how individuals affect both the propensity, the decision to collaborate, and how they perceive the effectiveness of that collaboration once it is underway. Now we get to the perceived effectiveness dependent variable. And here you see, again, stark differences between the local government results and the nonprofit results. Again, females in local governments are less likely to perceive the collaboration as effective. And education matters for nonprofit officials. They are more likely to see collaborations with local governments as effective. And there is no comparable result in the local government sample. And in terms of affiliation with the other sector, we have similar directions across the two sectors, but significance only among the local government sample. Local government officials who have been members of NGOs or served on boards of NGOs or otherwise participated with those organizations are more likely to perceive the collaboration as effective, and that would be consistent with our hypotheses. Notice that experience in the other sector is not statistically significant, nor is tenure and current position. So these individual variables, that is the characteristics of the individuals involved in collaboration, we would say so far minimally important, but also different across the two sectors. Gender seems to be pretty consistent. So what does this mean? We think, at this point in our analysis, that the takeaway is that the characteristics of the individuals in these organizations really operate differently in the two sectors. So the institutional frameworks for NGOs in Lebanon and the institutional frameworks for local governments in Lebanon are contexts that are very different and that actually generate very different relationships between the individuals in the organizations, the leaders, the people who make the decisions, and the outcomes that we're looking at here, the performance of the collaboration and whether or not it even exists in the first place. So in terms of the decision to collaborate, our first dependent variable, the experience and tenure and with the other sector, reduce the likelihood of collaboration among local government leaders, but not in the nonprofit sector. Gender, again, female leaders in local governments are just less likely to collaborate, possibly because of perceived insecurities in the central government, local government relationship in Lebanon, which is very hierarchical, very paternalistic, very controlling. There are very few independent revenues at the local level in Lebanon, so it's very much a sort of a arms of the central government kind of municipal system. And then when we look at the performance variable, if you will, the perceived effectiveness of collaboration, you can see that education, as I mentioned earlier, does have, higher education matters for local government leaders in terms of how they perceive the effectiveness of their collaborative efforts with local governments. But that is not an operative variable for local government leaders. Education does not seem to matter in local government. And then gender, again, same. Local government leaders less likely to perceive effectiveness of the collaboration. So we are still in the midst of this analysis. We're presenting here our results after a few different iterations. And we have also done some modeling with some interaction variables, but we are really intrigued now because in part, we feel like the models are not providing enough context on the groups of attributes that matter in the decision to collaborate and the perceived effectiveness of collaboration. And so we are beginning to proceed into a qualitative comparative analysis, a QCA approach, which identifies combinations of characteristics that are correlated with our dependent variables in ways that are different than what we see in traditional multivariate regression analysis. Excuse me. We're beginning to see this used more and more in published papers. We've been seeing a lot of this among European scholars as they look at government performance and nonprofit performance. And so we're going to try to incorporate this technique into our own analysis. And we thank you and look forward to your comments.
All right, thank you. So let's turn our attention to Dr. Jennifer Hamburger.
Good morning. Let me get my screen up. So the title of my presentation is can everyone hear me okay? The collaborative process between communities and local government, the public administrator's responsibility. A little bit of background of how I got to this topic is, one, I am retired law enforcement and kind of was in local government, and so saw it from a frontline perspective, and then also having been invited to various collaborative forums. And a lot of times you get there and the next collaboration is the same topic that you talked about the first time. So I'm not quite sure how much collaboration goes on. So it interests me, and I thought, well, local government has some responsibility, or the public administrator has some responsibility in the collaborative process. So why should we study the collaborative process? One is the collaborative process between communities and local government. It lies in the collaborative governance theory. Which says that there is a private actor and a public actor. Inherently, by nature of that, they're going to bring to the table different values. Ultimately, the goal of collaborations is you want to solve problems or identify problems and provide solutions by bringing together a diverse population. So the idea of the diversity is that when you bring various participants or diverse participants to the table, then you're going to kind of force people to think beyond what's comfortable for them and their own perceptions, which means considering values that someone else at the table perceives as important. So somewhere in the midst of this, there has to be an element of trust. So the interesting part is, how do you get trust? You've got a diverse group of stakeholders sitting at the table that may or may not know one another. So how do you begin to initiate trust or links of trust between this group, so that while you may come to the table with personal or individual motives, you're also there because you're for a bigger purpose. So in this study, collaborative governance, public value, and decision-making were used as the theoretical underpinnings to study this process. Quite often, we find that in current processes, generally, there's kind of a decision already made of what the outcome will be in the collaboration. And then you're bringing people together to put their ideas out there, but quite often someone has already made a decision what's in the best interest before considering the values of those brought to the table. So interestingly, in this topic, I used policy on abandoned buildings as a conduit to study the processes. Why did I do this? Policy on abandoned buildings will vary greatly between cities, municipalities, etc. However, there is a common theme in that abandoned buildings impact both the community residents and local government in all areas. They, through the use of money, how money is spent within the local government, how residents perceive their neighborhood. I'm sure we're all aware of broken windows theory, et cetera, but from the government's perspective, there's a lot of resources that are spent through first responders, et cetera, dealing with issues surrounding abandoned buildings. So this was the ideal scenario to just get into what is that relationship now between local government and the community members, and how does the public administrator navigate that relationship? So I used community-based participatory research, which ultimately uncovered that I went into this with public value, collaborative governance, and decision-making as my theoretical underpinnings. So when I went into the study, it was looking for those primary themes. And also, to be quite honest, when I went into the study, my idea was that public value would be perceived in aesthetics of abandoned buildings, or the lack of aesthetics of abandoned buildings. However, through the interviews and focus groups and the historical data, I found that it wasn't that at all. It was value was represented by trust. So trust and credibility emerged as major themes in this process, and decision-making actually kind of fell out because participants couldn't get through if they didn't trust, and that value and trust was not established on the front end, then it really didn't matter what the decision was. So it kind of fell out. And if you see at the bottom here, I have value, collaboration, and execution, because that's the sequence that emerged. In other words, local government had to establish value with the residents. Then the residents would be open to a collaborative setting. And then the public administrator could execute decisions from that collaboration. And I use execution because it's not just a matter of decision-making, but it's also that sustainability after the outcome of the. So again, we talked about the abandoned buildings, that it varies widely across the United States, meaning value is perception. In this context, the buildings ended up taking on the reflection of the relationships between the groups. The data for this was individual interviews, focus groups, and historical data. I used the historical data was interesting because I had quite a few comments of why the 911 calls. And interestingly, in this study, there was a particular abandoned building that was referenced in the individual interviews, the focus groups, the city council minutes, and the 911 calls. So the 911 calls really just added another layer of richness to the study to see, did anything correspond or accentuate the other data that was received, and it did. They all of this triangulated and converged on the necessity of trust and credibility. So participants were asked if really if they could separate trusting the person versus the process. And if they did not trust the person, they had no credibility in the outcomes of the process. If they could trust the person, but if they didn't trust the people who created the process, then there was no credibility in the outcomes. So it showed that trust and just your common attributes that feed into developing trust and credibility were significant in how residents perceived value. So there's a pattern that begins to emerge, which is, as I said, first that value has to be established. And in this, there has to be an intervention to establish the value. So you get from, we have this diverse group of stakeholders now sitting at the table, or whether it's the community and local government, the same model applies in any situation. You have to establish what is value among these members. That takes an intervention piece. So someone who goes in and specifically looks to establish that level of trust. What's important, the listening, the communication, as the participants in this study described, and just opening the doors to move to, are they willing to collaborate now? So this would be seen in the administrative tethering aspect, where you have someone that, because all of these notions or these underpinning, these theories are connected. You have to have value to get to collaboration. You have to have collaboration to get to your decision making. And if you want there to be value in your outcomes, so all of these are tethered. All of these are building blocks tethered together. But you need that independent person that can come in and intervene and create these authentic relationships to get you to your end product. And it's like a string being pulled, a thread being pulled. If you pull that thread too tight in connecting these blocks, then you're going to break it. And if there's too much control in this, then the string breaks and you lose the relationships. Well, the opposite is true. If you don't pull the string tight enough, then no one's communicating and there's not a connection being made. So in the tethering aspect, you want to get just the right amount of relationship building in these stages so that you have sustainable outcomes. In this study too, the residents, they were very open to collaboration. They wanted to collaborate with the local government. However, they were looking to local government to extend that invitation. They didn't want, they've had a lot of local government talking the talk and not putting anything behind it. So they were open to it, but they wanted to see, what are you going to do to prove to us that you want to do this? So I found that interesting that they were open, but they were looking for local government to initiate that. So now you have silos, you have parties that are operating in silos. So it's up to local government to initiate this reform and bridge the silos. I think an area in this study to take it to another level would be kind of conducting the same thing, but doing it just within local government to see what the perceptions were. This involved a focus group. One focus group was local government, business leaders, et cetera, basically non-residents. And then there was the resident focus group that involved the residents. So I think it would be interesting to take this and look at it just from a, do the same study just within local government. And that sums up the study.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to Kenneth, advancements in administrative tethering.
Okay, sir, give me a sec here, pull up slides. I do have Dr. Kevin Moreno and Dr. Wright are now here.
Okay, great.
Dr. Moreno will be presenting the first portion of the brief, sir.
Good morning, everybody. It is an honor to be here again at Suffolk. This is our third time visiting with you all to discuss administrative tethering. We're glad to see Dr. Hamburger working through her research as well. It's an honor to be here with her. So just some updates about administrative tethering. This process, this theory got started in Western North Carolina and from the child protective world. So I've been in child protection for more than 15 years, prior to that in forensic psychology. And the challenges that we come into with this social problem are really complex. And so I'm going to give you some background and give you the latest updates, because Dr. Wright and I have been working with this research since 2014, and it's all focused around the work of Herbert Simon. However, before that, I just wanted to introduce you to the team at the Real Academy. Myself, I'm Dr. Kevin Moreno, and I would ask that Dr. Wright and if Dr. Sammy is here to introduce themselves, and then Ken, introduce yourself and explain what you do at the Academy.
This is Dr. Wright, and I'm the Director of Research and Development for the Academy. And as Dr. Kevin said, is that we've been working on this perspective for probably roughly 7 or 8 years, going on 8 years. So that's kind of my story as such. Thank you.
Hey, hi, this is Dr. Sami Al-Dijwi. I'm assistant professor at management in Taiba University, Medina, Saudi Arabia. I have been working with the government for about 26 years. This is about me. Thank you for hearing that. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ken Powers. I am a MPA student at Norwich University, working under Professor Dr. Wright. He's brought me on as a kind of a junior research assistant, and I've been responsible for the model that we're going to present today with the guidance of Dr. Wright, Dr. Moreno.
Okay, so administrative tethering, the central aim in the application really centers on relationship, high quality relationship. The collaboration doesn't work as well unless I have a really strong relationship with those that I'm collaborating with. And inside complex social issues like child welfare, you see child welfare oftentimes it gets stuck. Children are left in vulnerable situations that are not safe. And it's really difficult for middle managers and practitioners to invoke and elicit change in the system. We're the ones doing the work every day. We know what the challenges are we face in the field. However, we don't have a close connection with academia, and we don't have a close connection with executive leadership or with the state leadership. So Dr. Wright and I developed administrative tethering as a way to move relationship into a leadership position in which I became, as the practitioner, the administrative tetherer. And so the innovation that was conceptualized with the nature and the scope matching the complex social issue to engage multiple partners in an organic way instead of being told to collaborate through legislator or policy. This organic structure allowed us to cross jurisdictions, allowed us to cross and transcend different hierarchical structures, whether it's the home or the state agencies or multiple state agencies at this point in time. And all of this is conceptualized and practiced through application of building high quality relationships through understanding each other's rationality and where we're bound. My thoughts are only as good as my thoughts, and you have thoughts and perspectives and experiences that are valuable. And together we can identify bounded rationality in each other and move the mission, because that's the second aspect, is that we're focused on the mission and the outcome rather than the transactions and the outputs. And so when you're focused on relationship and bounded rationality, that can lead you into the position of near decomposability. As Simon states, that near decomposability is the most fertile ground for change. And so AT then can inform sustainable collaboration through the organic structure, which is focused on the mission of the work. And so collaboration then becomes meaningful, and the analysis of the collaboration allows the renewed activities to continue to grow. As illustrated in the Western 10 project, where I started relationship to relationship, one dyad built multiple dyads and polydyads, to where I had relationships with more than 10 counties. Now I have relationships with 23 counties. I'm no longer in the state system. I've actually emerged at the academy, and we have a public-private hybrid now, which is accelerating the ability to foster and implement innovation. So let me show you through the model of what those elements are. The first element here, you can see in the tethering realm, when you're building relationship, trust is first. My relationship with you is only as strong as the trust that we have together. And that means you do what you say you're going to do. Value, I value you. I value you as a person. I value your morals. I value your beliefs. And those all align with the mission. And trust and value build accountability into what we're aiming for to accomplish that mission. And the strength of the accountability leads towards motivation, and it keeps us focused on the missional goal. But at the center is that relationship. And so what happens in the tethering realm, in the next section of the model, as the AT manager, you begin to experience the ability to move, because the authority of all of these other leaders in the structure, the DSS agency directors, the state agency, impart that authority to you to move innovation forward as a middle manager. And so here you find, as the AT manager, it brings an equilibrium, a balance to the system, because you're focused on the mission. And you literally, as an AT manager, find yourself in that line of peril, to where you're constantly mitigating those messages that are coming back and forth from the state to the local, from state to state, and various partners. And that's your mission as the AT manager. Keep us focused on the mission, keep us focused on the outcome, and work into that collaboration. So Ken, go ahead and move us to the next slide. So the facts that demonstrate that is that collaboration, not via the traditional practices, is that we're not a network of dyads and nodes. We're a network of people and relationships. We're a community. It's a system. It's not a system of transactional processes, but it's a system of value of people's thoughts and beliefs and work towards that mission. And it's not, collaboration is not assigned via policy or legislation. It's organic, because we're at the right place at the right time, and we're focused on that mission. Collaboration through AT is hinged on high quality relationships. It unites us, that mission focuses us and unites us, and that's the motivation. And heavily invests in trust and value through the tethered partners, which produces the accountability and produces the outcomes, and we're focused on outcomes rather than outputs. And so we're going to give it over to Ken now, and he's going to walk you through an exemplar from military perspective to show it not only works in the child welfare world, but it can also work in other ventures as well.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Moreno. Good morning. As previously stated, I'm Ken Powers. The strategic corporal and 3-block war concepts were developed by the former commandant, 31st Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Charles Krulak in '99. The basis of his concepts, it represents levels of junior leadership that need to be empowered with the ability to make decisions in a rapidly ever-changing environment. The concepts presented by General Krulak are relative to AT or relative in AT theory, in that AT managers need to be empowered by senior leaders to make decisions within a rapidly ever-changing collaborative environment consisting of diverse personalities and solving complex problems. Before discussing the construct used for the application of General Krulak's concepts, I want to provide a quick overview on structural equation modeling. Techniques of structural equation modeling allow researchers to analyze the plausibility of their notions, relationships, and impacts of non-experimental data. The use of structural equation modeling requires the development of a conceptually derived model that specifies relationships among variables and the application of theory to determine alternative ways of depicting these relationships. Through follow-on confirmatory methods of analysis, researchers can assess and modify their theoretical models for further theory development. The structure of our current exploratory model, as it applies to AT theory and decision-making, is based on application of latent observables in line with AT principles that are measured against observables based on the concepts of General Krulak. This allows us to further develop and refine administrative tethering as a theory for accepted public policy administrative practices. Based on the ideas and concepts behind AT, we assess the following latent variables as having the greatest impact on positive collaborative behaviors, leading to effective decision-making and collaborative efforts. These variables are identified as: 1, communication channels between subordinates and senior leaders, the effectiveness of communication between the effectiveness of these communication channels between subordinates and senior leaders, an organization's ability to adapt to a multidimensional and complex operating environment, and 4th, the subordinate loyalty and dedication to the organization. The following observable variables were extracted from General Krulak's concepts. Qualities, first, qualities and training, identifying the qualities and the training that's required for subordinates to function in a multidimensional environment. 2, success depends on the leadership of junior subordinate leaders. 3, crisis response has become more complex due to rapid changes in the operational environment. And 4th, the lines differentiating different types of operations have become more blurred due to changes in the operational environment. The selection of questions obtained from the United States Office of Personnel Management 2019 Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey dataset reflect our observed variables. From this dataset, we only selected respondents identifying as members of the Marine Corps, as these members would best represent the values initially established by General Krulak's concepts, which were initially intended for the United States Marine Corps in 1999. Now we will get into key insights and benefits. The first portion of our statistical measurement used principal component analysis or exploratory factor analysis to identify common components among our observable variables. The value of PCA is that it reduces the dimensionality of the data while increasing interpretability and minimizes information loss by creating uncorrelated variables that maximize variance. PCA is a technique that is adaptive, does not require distributional assumptions, and can be used for multiple types of data. Based on our results, we identified the 4 components or groupings of observable variables that were matched to our latent variables. Our structural equation model was run on SPSS Amos 2.7. As you see on the diagram, starting at the center, you can see the latent variables and their association to our work on administrative tethering as annotated by ND, BR, and AT. The double-headed arrows joining our latent variables indicate correlation between variables related to positive behavior leading to good decision-making. Moving outward, we have our observables identified as questions taken from the OPM survey data set, which allow us to analyze both observable and latent variables in our analysis. These survey questions were grouped and assigned to our latent variables as previously identified in our preliminary principal component analysis. Our exploratory analysis resulted in the following: a normed fit index of 0.911, a comparative fit index of 0.913, and a root mean square error of approximation equal to 0.09. An NFI of 0.91 indicates that our model improves the null or independence model by 91%. The CFI of 0.913 is the extent that our hypothesized model is a better fit than the independence or null model. The root mean square error of approximation is the average residuals that exist between observed correlations, covariance of the sample, and the model estimated for the population. Based on recommended good fit cutoff measures of an NFI greater than or equal to 0.95, a CFI greater than or equal to 0.90, and an RMSEA less than 0.08, our model suggests value and further improvement in continued confirmatory analysis using our model on positive behavior and administrative tethering to ensure the effective and efficient decision-making in an ever-changing social, political, and economic environment. And this concludes my portion.
So go ahead, Bob.
Oh, yeah, sure. I just want to take my hat off to Ken and his diligence in this presentation and his kind of getting into the research realm with the OPM data. I think, and to kind of follow kind of what Kevin was saying about Herbert Simon, one of the key kind of components is near decomposability. And what we're kind of framing that too is the notion of a fit organization. So with that said, I think that's something that I just want to reemphasize as a key component, because at the end of the day, when we look at this, we, with collaboration and, which is somewhat prompted by the complex problems of crisis, at the end of the day, if we get a solution as such or an approach, the kind of fit into organizational perspective or mantra, it has to maintain that kind of discipline, if you will, in order to remain fit and thus respond and evolve as per assignment. And I think that the key thing, if you will, to take away or kind of think about is that in terms of the fit organization, it has to kind of keep its nose to the grindstone. And I think that's kind of where the further research is going to portend. What we're seeing now are kind of the notion of the institutional perspective and heuristics. And I think those may be some very much interesting research to pursue as such. With that said, when we look at the Fredrickson piece, I think next slide, Ken.
No, sir, that was.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. There we go.
Here we go. Yeah, it's just to kind of reinforce the notion that this kind of coalesces with what Simon says, is that it's good, ultimately to think about these things in theory, and there's a limit of what we can do in the field or from a decision-making perspective. That's why heuristics, I think, are very helpful, and it gives like a perspective, a nudge to theory as to where it can go, and I think that combination is very useful. Moreover, what we're trying to do now, if you will, is to really, get, as Simon says, off the armchair and jump into the field. And that's what we've been doing with the Western 10. And I think Ken is, taking some of that under his wing. And I know Dr. Sammy, we're starting to contemplate some multinational perspectives in Saudi Arabia, et cetera. Dr. Sammy? Can you comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Bob. This is a model could be fit and work well in different kind of institution, large size, small size, and medium size. This is work AT model as they presented. It's work well in international organization, even in Middle East, Saudi Arabia, or even in Eastern Asia, China and Japan as well. This is model also can save more money than different model that has been used. Thank you, and the mic with you, Bob and David.
And that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, and let's move on to our fourth presentation. Ansuman Raboni. You take us away, Dr. Raboni, please.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Mark Fudge, for allowing me to present. I hope you all can see my presentation. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes, you could share screen if you want.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
So, no, actually, sorry, not share screen, just maximize the screen. Yeah. We can see yours.
Okay. Okay. All right. Shall I start with the presentation? I'm sure you all are able to see my screen. Today's topic I'm taking is on an appraisement of the imperatives of National Institute Ranking Framework, NIRF, and the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAC, in improving performance and quality of higher education in India. The idea here is, you might wonder, well, what is the reason I'm taking this topic? It's because I found this one ideal system where some kind of performance management initiatives have been taken. Although the government of India has, tested many performance management systems, one of the most successful performance management system, I would say, is this in higher education, this model of NIRF and NAC. As far as NAC is concerned, it is more concerned with qualitative analysis. And as far as NIRF is concerned, it is more concerned with the quantitative analysis. The government of India, in order to address the concerns of higher education, adopted a strategic assessment technique for improving the quality and performance in the form of NAC and NIRF. And they found it to be very successful because as far as the institution is concerned, the number has increased and the quality of education has increased if you take an assessment throughout the years, because we have issues of population, we have issues of socio-economic status, and also inclusive systems, so which is all found in this model. To introduce what NAC is NAC is nothing but a National Assessment and Accreditation Council, which was initiated by the University Grant Commission, which is coming under the government of India, although it is an autonomous body for higher education, but it also is a funding agency. So the issue here is since it's a funding agency, they wanted to be sure that the funds they're giving to the institution are used resourcefully and also qualitatively improve the education system. And hence, this kind of assessment council was adopted, and along with it, NIRF also was set up. This NAC was set up in 1994, and the NIRF was set up in 2015. So if you see, the vision of NAC is basically is to establish quality in education. And this is done by self-assessment and also by an external evaluation by a group of external experts on the institution in order to bring a sustenance of initiatives and also programs. The mission of NAC is nothing but, it's basically to arrange some kind of system which would, help in the assessment and accreditation of institutions of higher education and also of specific academic programs or projects. In order to encourage academic environment in higher education, institutions also need to promote quality of teaching and learning. It is understood that the standard of teaching has improved so considerably because of this NAC assessment. And also, one of the mission of NAC is also on encouraging self-evaluation. There is a self-study report initially given, submitted to NAC in order to be accountable and responsible, and also be, in the sense, autonomy in order to have a curriculum which is very innovative and creative to help the education system. It also promotes quality-based research studies, consultancy, and training programs. Of course, since we are talking a lot on collaboration here, the collaboration with the stakeholders, of course, it is a student-centric approach, but it is a holistic development where the teachers are also benefited because you are actually promoting things to benefit the students. And by training the teachers effectively, it also benefits the students in turn. I wouldn't go much into the functioning because basically NAC has a group of policy makers and educational administrators, academicians involved, especially experts in the field of education, who will be functioning for the assessment and accreditation of the system. When you're talking about education, it is important because it not only improves the quality of life, but also the quality of the society, and also it makes the people very aware of what they're doing. So it is important. It is also important to bring quality in higher education because the standard of the students have to improve so that the standard of the country also is improved. First, they do a voluntary assessment, and also the performance of the institutions are set with a set of parameters. Now, what are the parameters? We will just look. There are 7 criteria. One is the curriculum aspects. Then you have the teaching, learning, and the evaluation aspect. Then you have the research, innovation, and extension. Then you have infrastructure and learning resources, the type of resources, the innovation, student of support and progression, and also governance, leadership, and management of the institution concerned, and institution values and best practices. Institution values is something which is time and time repeated, although we are talking about public performance. Throughout, I could hear the importance of values and instilling the sense of values among the especially the stakeholders or the citizens in general. Now, the grading is done based on the points you get in the criteria, and the best rating will be between the 3.151 to 4, which is A++. And you see very few institutes falling into that category because they're making more stringent and more, with metrics and more quantified and also qualified so that it is the institutions are not easily eligible for that criteria, so that it becomes more competitive, and the healthy competition is always good. Now, if you see, I've put the table for the curricular aspects. They have given certain weightage as far as the universities are concerned, and different weightage for autonomous colleges are concerned, and as far as the affiliated colleges, the weightage is different. As far as colleges are concerned, the emphasis is more on teaching, learning, and evaluation. And as far as universities are concerned, the emphasis is more on research, innovation, and extension. But the other criteria is more or less equally distributed. So Now, we'll talk about the NIRF. The NIRF is done annually, and it is just ranking of the institution. You are not assessing the institution, you're ranking the institution based on the data which is given by the institution. So that you will periodically know where you stand in the nation, and also you can also compare with the other institution few practices which can be instilled. So when you take the methodology here again, 5 parameters are there involved. One is teaching, learning, and resources. The second is research and professional practices. And the third method or criteria is graduation outcomes. Then the fourth criteria is outreach and inclusivity. And the fifth criteria is peer perception. So these are the broad areas, which is again subdivided into various factors. And this is a suitable proposed metric which calculates the score of each subhead as per the data, and all the scores of the subhead are added to obtain the score of every individual head. How is that? I will just give you a few explanation for that. As far as the teaching, learning, and resources are concerned, they give 100 marks points for it. And the weightage for that out of the total 500 points is 30%. And the overall assessment metric is based on certain factors, that is the student strength, which includes the PhD scholars and also the faculty-student ratio, depending on the quality of the faculty, also whether they are all qualified with PhD holders. And also it also includes a combined metric for faculty with PhD and experience, which is an important factor for improving the institution, and also the financial resources which is available and their fair utilization of the resources is given some amount of weightage. Now, if you look into the second research point, research and professional practice, it is again divided into various components. And one component is for the publication, the quality of publication, whether it is H index or it comes under the Web of Science, or it is qualified by the ISBN. And is it a patent published, or it's a grant, it's a footprint of a project? Based on that, various points are given, and here the weightage again is 30% of the whole criteria. Then you have the graduation outcome. Here again, the pass percentage is an important factor, and also the number of PhDs which is coming out of that institution. But the problem here is, again, it's a pressure for the institution, and sometimes the quality will be compromised. So this is one area which is a very sensitive area, because you are catering not only to the above average students, you're also catering to the average students. And how do you gauge the quality, whether if they get pass mark, it means the quality of education is good just because of their marks, or are they really competent enough? That is one issue which is running as far as an act is concerned, which will be included in the new education policy, which they are bringing in employability as one of the factors. So they are bringing a student progression, that is after the undergraduation, are they going for higher studies, or and they are getting employed? That is one factor which they are gauging, so that the outcomes is better. What about the outreach and inclusivity is also a biggest point which needs to be looked into, because here they are including percentage of students from other states, other countries, and the facilities available should be good enough for the people from the other states or other countries to be safe in that place. And the percentage, the diversity factor is also one important factor. What about the economically and socially challenged? Are they given some kind of sponsorship? And what are the provision given for the physically challenged? Are there ramps? Are there libraries for them? What are the facilities? And based on that, there is some amount of weightage given, not much. Finally, you have perception, the fifth criteria, which is very important. Perception, which is the important point, because it is not dependent on the institution at all. It only depends on the performance of the institution, because this is a perception by the peers, by the employers, by the the magazines which rate the institution. So it's based on that you get some points about the availability. So if you see India ranks 35th on the worldwide educating for the future index. It's because of the efforts of NAC, and you can see the number of student enrollment has increased during the years as far as higher education is concerned. And also if you see that more emphasis is there on the engineering and the art side. It's not proportional, but then it is becoming more interdisciplinary in nature as far as higher education is concerned because of the introduction of NAC and NIRF. And if you see, as I told you at the beginning, if only 4% of the colleges come under the A++ category. So the number of institutions involved getting into the accreditation and assessment council is increasing by the day because they find it very effective. And then finally, I'm giving a comparison between NAC and NIRF, which says NAC is just an assessment and accreditation council, which for all the institutions. On the other hand, NIRF is based on ranking. And this is done every year. As far as NAC is concerned, it's done once in every 5 years. And the evaluation is very qualitative, wholesome. And as far as NIRF is concerned, it's quantitative methodology, which helps to gauge where the institutions stand. And there can be improvement year after year. Then accreditation is also provided for every 5 years as far as NAC is concerned. And here the NIRF ranking can change based on the competition. NAC, on the other hand, is assessment, and accreditation is conducted by both internal and external evaluation. Here it's more based, NIRF is just based on whatever information is given to the NIRF board. And finally, evaluation is done in the 7 criteria. Here, NIRF is also done with 5 criteria parameters, which is quite effective for improving the quality as well as the number of enrollment as far as education in India is concerned. And I would like to say that I think, more emphasis should be given on this because it's this symposium itself is an eye-opener, because there could be more models introduced into NAC and NIRF where we can improve the system for a better. But as far as a successful program is concerned, a model is concerned, I think NAC and NIRF is doing very well as far as higher education in India is concerned. Thank you very much for this opportunity. If there is any question, I'd be happy to answer.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rabuni. How about we turn over to Tom? So we'll lead the discussion now.
Sure, thank you, Mark. Thank you to all the presenters and everybody who's with us listening. I'll be as brief as I can to allow time for questions to the presenters. I'll go in the order that the papers were presented, maybe suggesting a couple of points of overlap as we go. But starting with the first paper, the Johnston paper, really interesting work here. And I'll just, in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask some questions for you to consider. And if there's time for response, then we'll have it after. But the first thing is it possible for you to know, are there demographic statistics available within the country that can tell you what the educational achievements are across the sectors? So employment records of some kind across government and nonprofit. That would be just very interesting descriptively to see what those distinctions are, and whether or not there's a mismatch in educational achievement, or what the variation of educational achievement is within each sector. Maybe you have that within your sample. That would be very interesting to include and present in the context here. With that, I was on the education topic, I was intrigued to see PhD in the nonprofit sector, if I saw the slide correctly. And that led me to think, I think the obvious question, how many PhDs were in your sample in the nonprofit sector? It's something I would not expect to normally see. And again, showing that variation of degree achievement across each sector would maybe provide the context needed to properly interpret that. But that was really quite interesting to have that included. As on the effectiveness measure, I guess my biggest question is whether or not the respondents had a shared definition of effectiveness as they were offering their perception. As we know from the literature on collaboration across government nonprofit organizations and value differences across government and nonprofit employees and workers, the what is valued and how one judges success is likely to vary. And then so it's interesting. It's good to show that there's distinction between what is determined effective and what is not determined effective. But it would be interesting and useful to apply some objective effectiveness criteria and weigh the perception against those objective standards. I don't know, maybe that's what you did. I'm not sure, but that's one question that's in my mind. Back to the education piece. I would be interested to know not only what the educational achievement level is across sectors, but also what the terminal degree is available in each sector. So is there something equivalent to a Master of Nonprofit Management in Lebanon that folks can pursue? Is there a Master of Public Administration or Public Management? Are folks getting a business degree? You know, what is the discipline of focus? And that would also add some nice nuance to the analysis, particularly if you show, for instance, MBAs are not as likely as MPAs to offer or perceive a need for or to engage in collaboration. In terms of future research, I like the idea of conducting a qualitative comparative analysis. I wonder now if it's possible, if your sample is large enough, to break down or to analyze based on the city, or maybe the region, if not the city, for the local government officials and the nonprofit officials. So this is you present the nationwide, the countrywide analysis. Can you take different regions of the country, if not individual cities, and show maybe there's a greater shared perception of what is effective or not effective, or a desire to collaborate, or what the environment is for collaboration in a particular region or a particular municipality that might not exist in another. And so breaking it down regionally would maybe help find those interesting comparative cases for your next steps. But overall, I think this is just a nice paper. I'd be interested to know why Lebanon, that it wasn't clearly communicated. I assume just based on past research and then you have the relationships in place and so on and so forth. And you suggested that there might be lessons for the United States and other countries. But you also observe the cultural differences, like the patriarchal society and so on. So what is the applicability of the Lebanon experience to any other country? And so I'll leave it at that. So I'm just going to roll on. If we have time for response, we can get to it. In the Hamburger paper, I love this work. My own dissertation research from the University of Southern California in 2005, 6, 7 time period was a participatory action research project that focused on collaboration. So I very much appreciate the use of participatory research to study and research collaborative factors and factors that support the involvement in collaborative process and how do you build the relationships. So I really like that idea, and I'm glad to see it being put into use. I didn't get a strong sense, however, of what the participatory element was, or how maybe how the focus groups were managed in a way. And what was that intervention? What was your role in that intervention? What was their relationship with you or with others on the research team? Really, fleshing that out would help provide the appropriate context for assessing the participatory research approach. My own work in the city of Los Angeles, if you want to look it up, is it was a project called the Collaborative Learning Project, where my team and I facilitated dialogues in the process we call the Learning and Design Forum between neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles and municipal agencies, a Parks and Rec agency, a Public Works agency or street services, and a transportation agency. We facilitated a set of 3 dialogues that led ultimately to an agreement to collaborate in some kind of implementation of a new relationship, new initiative, so forth and so on. So it sounds like it's not terribly unlike what you're doing based on the different points of intervention, the different points where you might engage in shared dialogue. But in our case, the university served as the neutral convener. That was the role of the university, which allowed us to get the participants to at least suspend judgment about trust relationships in order to progress into dialogue and deliberation and build their experience with each other, build their relationship together in order to progress to the more intensive collaboration. And so that would lead to a question I have, which is why you concluded that local government should initiate these processes. I'm curious why local government in that formulation. Is it why cannot the citizen groups do it? Why cannot a business group initiate? What is it about the local government, and would that vary depending on which local government you're examining or you're working with? So I'd encourage you to think more about that conclusion and whether or not it really is the best pathway, universally speaking, or only if it's within your particular context. Let's see. You answered a question I wrote about how is community defined, but you answered that looking at focus groups with non-residents and another with residents. So I have a better understanding of that. Trust is an interesting issue, and I'll segue with that to the next paper on tethering, because you both spoke about trust. And trust is an issue that I've been wrestling with in my own work since my own dissertation in California and in the years since. And I'm not sure that I'd love for a broader conversation about this, because I know there are lots of folks in here and participating in this conference who focus on trust issues. But is trust really the best relational outcome to pursue? I've been toying with the idea of skepticism as an outcome rather than trust. So more of a trust but verify posture rather than a general trust posture. So I'd love for both papers to think about the trust issue and exploring whether or not trust is really the necessary thing, or maybe be a bit more explicit on the definition of trust applied. The tethering paper overall is really interesting, and I'd love to learn more. I appreciate the desire to expand in multiple contexts this model as expressed by the multiple presenters. Starting with the child protection piece is great. As a parent to a former foster youth adoption, I understand the challenges of child welfare and child protective services and all of this. And it is a very complex space. And it very much a multi-sector, multi-organization, then add to the mix parents who are mixed in their level of experience in dealing with hurt children, right? So I appreciate that the need to focus on how to better structure relations in that child protection arena. I'm curious, just broadly speaking, and that applies in child protection in the military context and beyond, why tethering? That's the focus. What is missing in the existing language around network governance that tethering, where tethering fills the gap, right? So I wrote down that I think that the tethering manager is basically a broker plus in a network context, right? I think, but there's more to it than that. So I'd be really interested to know what's the value add of you introducing a new concept here, or a new word to define a set of actions that have been discussed in the literature, but maybe not in the way you have. So some clarity on that point would be very useful and interesting. Next, just because I'm almost out of time here, and I have a hard stop in 3 minutes to get into another meeting, unfortunately. But on the Rabbani paper, really important topic of measurement systems in higher ed, and this is another area of research that I'm actively engaged in as I look at university community collaborations. I'm at UCF, University of Central Florida. I direct an Office of Community Engaged Scholarship, where I specifically focus on how to strengthen relations between university and community. So measuring performance of universities, as is measuring performance of any entity or any program, shapes behavior within the institution. And I think there's not as much research as we would like to see, particularly from the public administration, public affairs side, and how these measures shape university or higher ed behavior. And there's a need for more of that. And so I really applaud the focus. I'd be interested for further reflection, an assessment of what is not included in the measurement scheme, right? That is just as important as what is included. What is included shapes our behavior, shapes our budget, shapes the projects we choose to implement or not implement, what we choose to strategize around and or not. But from your view, what is not included that you think is a value or an important responsibility of the higher education sector that should be included? And just as an example, in the United States, we've just had the release of US News World Report rankings that led a lot of folks to celebrate about movement up and down the ranks. Really interesting, but we know that those ranks the criteria used are focused very heavily on economic concerns. Some student concerns, but time to completion, graduation rate, student debt load after graduation, these kinds of economic measures. But what's missing is something that's of concern to me in my work are the citizen measures, civic measures. How are universities preparing students to become active and effective citizens in society? And I can go on like that around that topic for another hour. I won't. But just to lead that to say, what's missing in the framework that you presented? What are the what should be measured that is not, and what are the consequences of excluding those measures for the future performance of the sector? So with that, I'll stop and put it back to Mark.
All right, thank you very much, Thomas. Well, let's see, what questions do you all have for the presenters? I think Tom raised some interesting points, so perhaps you all have additional questions. Do the presenters want to address any of the questions or concerns that Dr. Breyer had? You have an opportunity to do that now.
Hey, so I'd like to make one comment on the trust issue and kind of how it may relate to the use of the Marine Corps. I think that a lot, that's kind of where one of the things that we're looking at with the confirmatory and the further research, but using the Marine Corps as a basis, just because, I mean, full disclosure, I am a former Marine. I did serve under the time with General Krulak. kind of taking it, if you want to say as like a practitioner of Krulek's concepts. And I mean, that has something that we've looked at, and we're trying to, kind of answer that, the importance of trust and why. So, I mean, it's a point very well taken as far as, your concern question on trust. So, but it is something we've thought about, and we consider and talk among ourselves as we continue to develop this. So I just wanted to say, great comment noting that, and we'll continue to work.
If I, no,
You can go ahead, Jocelyn.
Oh, thanks. I just want to say that it's interesting to me that these papers, even though they're on very different topics, they really all get to the level of the individual, which of course, most of us are used to thinking organizationally. The organizational is the unit of analysis. But when you get to trust, when you get to the tethering and what's going on in the relationships and tethering and so on, we're really talking about how individuals work together, that really micro level, which I think there's so much room for research on this, whether it's experimental or, qualitative. So I think we're all heading in the right direction. And Tom, I want to thank you again. Awesome comments. Thank you so much.
if so to add a little context to the study, when the study started, actually COVID had just struck the nation. And so it changed things a little, the dynamics a little bit in the study. And then right after that, we were having all of the political atmosphere was in a bit of an uproar. So interesting, the study, everything had to be conducted virtually. And so my role in the study was more of an outsider looking in. So everything, recruitment had to be through online. Literally everything was virtual. So the focus groups were made up of community. There was the residents who lived there, and then you had your non-residents, but still had an investment of some sort in the community. And then with the local government's responsibility was it was not necessarily that they were responsible, but in this study, the residents throughout the interviews and focus groups, the tone was they equated when they brought things to local government's attention and they didn't see any sort of outcome, then they perceived that as, okay, well, they're not listening to me, they're not communicating with me. So they didn't trust that local government was receiving what they were giving to them. So it was, they were looking to local government as I guess, the olive branch or whatever, to show them, okay, we do want to collaborate with you. And that was their, they were looking for that gesture to say, okay, there is some validity in what you're saying as far as local government reaching out to them. So would that be the same in another, in another sphere? I'm not sure that it may change a little bit, but in this, because the trust was so broken down and it really boiled down to those elements that you see in any other type of dynamic of, are you listening to me? Are you communicating with me? Do I see you? Have you done something to respond that shows you're listening to me? All of those little things fit into building trust, and they really could not separate. Trust and credibility were so intertwined. They really couldn't separate, again, the person from the process. They really saw that as kind of one and the same. So that was why trust was so significant in building those relationships, to get to a sustainable execution. So, but I think that's why, again, I can't say that local government in every instance would be the one, but I do, maybe because they're in a position of authority, perceived as authority, that you're looking for that figure to reach out to the non-authoritative figure. Thank you.
I just have add a few more words. I would like to appreciate the comments made by Professor Thomas. I just want to mention that he was asking about what are the areas or the lacuna as far as the framework is concerned in regarding education. I think it is a vast area which can be diversified, and it can be as more research is done, it will only benefit higher education. But one area I think which needs relevance and importance is the area of employability, and also the area as far as India is concerned. For policy formulation is very good, strategy is very good. The implementation or the practicability or availability in the institution is quite minimal. So that has to be gauged, and where the drawbacks are there is something which we need to look into. I think that is the point I would like to bring. Thank you.
All right, very interesting. Does anyone else have any questions? One thing that crossed my mind as listening to your presentations in these various areas of the world, Lebanon and India, the U.S. It strikes me that there are challenges to the collaboration or collaborative process, and some of the challenges we're kind of familiar with, whether it's cost or who is assuming the majority of the responsibility between agencies. But I just want to ask the presenters, were there challenges that you came across during the course of your research that you didn't expect, that were out of the norm somewhat?
I can answer. I'll do one quick anecdote from Lebanon. And the reason we did the research in Lebanon is that my colleague, Haldun Abouassi, is Lebanese, attended American University in Beirut, where he earned an MPA, similar degrees, but also worked in the non-governmental sector in Lebanon before he came to the US to do his graduate work. So at Syracuse, he did his PhD there and has been with us for a few years now. Just an interesting tidbit. There was no way to find a national list of non-governmental organizations operating in Lebanon when we were collecting our research, our data. So that is just one little institutional, example. The thing about Lebanon that I think is interesting in terms of generalizability is that we do have a lot of developing countries with this heavily centralized, heavily patriarchal kind of institutional framework. And to that extent, there's a lot that can be learned from this particular study for countries like that, where gender is just turning up in a lot of our research. Turns out to be very important there. But again, the personal connection, we're only really beginning to get into that there and elsewhere.
Yeah, interesting. Anyone else?
I think it was interesting, Dr. Fudge, for us here in the Western region, our collaboration, administrative tethering, started with my own efforts as a practitioner of middle management. And so as we built our community, our tethered partnership, and as we moved along, this is a sustainable project that's 4 years old now, and I still lead the project. What I've begun to notice, the surprise, is the number of external partners that are coming to us at this point. It's almost like it generates an omnidirectional wave. And Bob and I talk about this in our theory some, is that the energy that it produces a wave that moves out and then constricts back in. And so what the surprise to me personally, just being good old Southern boy, we grew up poor, not a lot going on here. It means a lot, was to see, elected officials cold calling me saying, Dr. Moreno, we hear you've got this project, this innovation is changing child welfare. How do we get involved? Administration for Children and Families cold calling me at my position. And that is almost never heard of. ACF never talks directly to practitioners. They always go through the state government. So the surprise for just little old me was, oh my goodness, this innovation, this administrative tethering really has power from an omnidirectional perspective. And so these small things that we do trigger the big things and the outcome. So that was a surprise for Bob and I both.
Yeah, terrific. That's really interesting. Out of the norm. You're right. You don't usually get those cold calls from state agencies or local government agencies, for sure.
And I think in mine, a couple of things was one, as I said, I came into my kind of predetermination, I guess, of public value and using, even though I was just looking at the policy, or not, excuse me, the policy as a conduit to look at the relationship, and abandoned buildings was just that applicable resource or source that applies to, across the board and impacts everyone. And so again, when I came into it thinking that really value would have reflected something more aesthetic and something more tangible, I was quite surprised when value consistently came back to things that made someone feel like that other person was hearing them, which everything boiled back again to trust and credibility. So for me, that was one surprise, that it was not in the literal sense of a tangible thing. And then the other, that local government in the city council notes, they talked about being proactive about things, but in reality, they were not. So again, it was one of those things that, again, with collaborations, you have a group that kind of says they're doing one thing or what they feel is important, but is that really coming across? And in this situation, it wasn't. So you had a space where local government was talking about doing proactive things. And in fact, in this community, they had sought out a consulting firm to come in and help with the revitalization of this downtown area. And in the notes that it would be a collaborative event or dialogue. In the interviews and focus groups, nobody knew about it. Nobody knew that this was happening. So I found it interesting that local government was talking about doing this initiative, but yet nobody in the participants in the study didn't know anything about what was happening. So to me, that was just an area of interest in with the perceptions was a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, sure. It's a collaboration, it sounds like. And unfortunately, I think that occurs a lot. So before we, well, thank you all the presenters for your wonderful research and sharing with us.